Now, Donald Trump has suggested that both Russia and Ukraine will have to compromise ahead of his talks with Vladimir Putin next week. So is he about to sell out Vladimir Zelensky, or is this a sensible strategy? Let's speak to Erol Morkoc, who is a Republican strategist and spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you so much for your time, Erol. Is Donald Trump about to roll over to Putin once again?
Well, I don't think he's ever rolled over to Putin. I think what's happening is that it's a showcase of decisive leadership by a man who's committed to peace. And it's one of the things that his voters have strongly pushed for. And it's something that's emphasizing realpolitik. You know, territorial swaps, the reality of the situation is that Europe showed up a day late and a dollar short to the situation at large. And right now, if Trump can find peace and find common ground with Vladimir Putin here and find a way to end the killing, he's going to do that. If that's considered rolling over, then we'll take the criticism along with the peace.
But surely forcing Ukraine to give up its sovereign territory would amount to rolling over?
No, because the forcing implies that we've gone over there and somehow lost the territory. Russia conquered that territory. Like in the famous phrase, all is fair in love and war. It's a very cruel result, but go tell the mothers of the American soldiers who died in Afghanistan, who watched us abandon Afghanistan and lose to the Taliban. Sometimes you lose wars. And when you lose wars, or when in this situation, it's different. You've come to a stalemate. You have 800 miles of trenches and nobody going anywhere. Russia has multiple entry hypersonic warheads. This is not a fair fight. So either you can escalate this to the point of World War III, or you can de-escalate it. And we're the party of de-escalation. That's going to come with the criticisms that you're leveling at us today. But we're willing to take those criticisms on behalf of the peace movement.
How much of the US would you be willing to give over?
If we had lost it in conquest, for example, is that what your question is? For example,
yeah, would you give up Texas? Would you give up Alaska? Would you give up Florida?
Well, let's break it down. Let's pick one state. Let's say a foreign country invaded, took over that entire state, and we've lost about 1 million people in the battle there. Certainly, the situation would come to something where we would look for peace if we couldn't win the war. In this situation, it's a common question levied, but it's really just not a very good gotcha, because in this situation, Russia has conquered this territory in Ukraine, and they've spent 600,000 lives. And for your listeners, think about this. There's $20 trillion of resources there. 500,000 guys die. That's $40 million ahead to Vladimir Putin, a bloodthirsty dictator. So how many bodies will he put in the meat grinder? How many people is he willing to sacrifice here? In the end, this is about life.
Erol, isn't the fact of the matter, if you are dealing with a bloodthirsty dictator, as you rightly describe him, you have to stand up to these people. That is the lesson from the last World War. You're talking about World War III. The lesson from the last World War is that you have to stand up to expansionist tyrants. And sadly, we didn't with Georgia in 2008 with regards to Putin. We didn't in 2014 with Crimea. And we have been too slow and too weak in our response to the full-scale invasion that happened in 2022.
Well, the only alternative then would be for, let's say, Europe to put together a, six-figure army coalition and then go and try to retake that Eastern European land. I mean, that's the situation, the reality of the situation. Yes, I understand, like in the situation of Hitler and the concert of Europe in World War I, how things go. But, this is a very localized problem in the eastern part of Ukraine. We can end this conflict here and go forward with now Ukraine getting this full level of support from Europe, which they hadn't received before, with now having the intertwined U.S. Deal for the natural minerals and this and that. These are the ways we can fight this battle with ledgers and economic ties rather than trying to take back this land, which would cost 1 million Western lives. I don't know any British mothers or American mothers or French mothers who would want to send their kids to go fight in that war, because that's what you are. That is the alternative to quote unquote.
Well, that's not necessarily what I'm advocating at all. I'm not necessarily saying we need Western boots on the ground. No, we could absolutely supply Ukraine with the weapons it needs to win the war. At the moment, all we have been doing is giving them enough not to lose, to stay in the fight, to live to fight another day.
If you were to give them those weapons, Vladimir Putin would be, in his world, justified to then escalate the weapons that he's deploying into the battlefield, which is only going to further exacerbate this conflict. Like, if you want to strike deeper into Russia, you can do that, but that's going to come back. And just because we're using Ukraine as a proxy and using their soldiers as proxies doesn't mean that that's not in violation of what Russia sees as pertinent aggression. I work in the defense industry. I've worked with the Ukrainian special forces. These guys are very brave people who fought and died to save their country. Russia threw a bunch of convicted felons and mercenaries at them. And the result now is the awful truth. And the awful truth is we need peace. And unless there's going to be a grand, let's say, effort by the Europeans to block peace after this, I can't imagine why they would do that unless they're willing to fight, which they're not.
But Erol, do you not think that the word of the US and the UK should mean something? Because may I remind you, in 1994, we forced Ukraine, along with Russia at the time, to sign the Budapest Memorandum to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for a guarantee that Russia would never be allowed to encroach on Ukrainian sovereign territory. And just 20 years later, under President Obama, so I'm not levelling this specifically at President Trump, I think Obama has to, answer for this as well. But when Putin went into Crimea in 2014, we did nothing. And then when Putin launched his full-scale invasion in 2022, again in breach of the Budapest Memorandum, we did nothing. Doesn't that go to show that the word of the US and indeed the UK doesn't mean anything?
Well, I'm glad that you went back in time there, because part of the deal around that time was, of course, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the other thing we did is we told the Russians if they took 300,000 soldiers out of East Germany, went back to where they came from, we would not move NATO 1 centimeter to the east. So at the same time that we made these agreements and these promises, we also made promises and agreements to the Russians that we did not keep. Now, does that justify any of the killing and murderous behavior? No. But if you want to talk about the geopolitical gamesmanship that went on, that is a real fact. And yes, we have a responsibility to Ukraine, but thank God they're not in NATO, or else we would be in World War III right now. And furthermore, the United States made that promise. Why did the United States keep expanding NATO towards Russia? Kissinger said don't do it. Every single strategic mind said don't do it. Yet the American neocons, led by Bush and Cheney, especially in this century, pushed it very hard in the beginning of the century. So it's a bigger situation than just putting all of the blame on the aggressive, bloodthirsty dictator that is Vladimir Putin. He's not acting without any logic. He's not an insane actor. He's actually a very pragmatic, cold-blooded person, and somebody who we would rather have peace than war with.
If Vladimir Putin doesn't compromise, and we don't know what concessions Trump may ask for, but if he doesn't compromise at all when they meet in Alaska next week, what should Trump do next, in your view?
In that situation, then we're stuck with what you're advocating, which would be to fully back the Ukrainians with extra munitions, extra lethal support, join this European coalition, and then put the absolute pressure on Russia that not only could they end up in a bad situation, but they could end up losing this situation. But this would be, again, an escalation. So that would be the result of this.
So it is possible for Russia to lose this war, in your view, then?
It's possible for Russia to lose this war if, and only if, we were willing to lose, let's go with tens of thousands of Western lives.
No, I don't think we need to put Western boots on the ground. I mean, there are weapons, there are JASSM missiles that the US have that, if it gave to Ukraine overnight, could have a huge impact. If you could destroy the Kerch Bridge, which Vladimir Putin built after his illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, connecting the Russian mainland to Crimea, if you could do that, that would strike a devastating blow to Russia. There are weapons we could provide right now, even just air defences. Look at the bombardment. You talk about the lives being lost and the desire for peace. Rightly, everyone wants that. But what about the Ukrainian lives currently being imperiled on a daily basis because of the drone and missile attacks being launched on Kyiv and other cities?
Exactly why we're going to search for peace. And I also want to bring to attention the serious situation of hypersonic missiles, Mach 10 missiles, with 6 multiple entry warheads that Russia has. I mean, this isn't, a normal enemy. This is a very sophisticated enemy with 5th generation, fighter jets. If you want to escalate with them, they can escalate back to you. So, the idea that you could win this war, you're talking about a war of attrition. You could potentially make worse negotiating terms for Vladimir Putin if you were willing to, for example, have another 500,000 or 1 million people die over the next 2 or 3 years. You saw what happened in World War I. With trench warfare, you can push this out as long as you want. You can also make this an economic war, because if the price of oil goes under a certain point, by the way, the Europeans are the ones who are buying all the oil. They bought $20 billion of oil from Vladimir Putin through roundabout intermediaries. So, at some point, that's why they're not sitting at the table, by the way, behavior like that. And so, yes, we could stretch this out. We could throw more lives in the meat grinder. Then we come back to a table in 2 years and maybe have better terms, maybe. Or we could have a worse situation. We could have potentially a loss of territory. Or we can try to push for peace based on the situation that the voters in America have sent their president to do. He's, a conduit for the American Republic. He's not there just advocating his opinion. We all voted for this and are asking him to go there and end the war. The war that, there was a
war. The war he said he could end in 24 hours, yeah.
And he also said he was exaggerating. But keep in mind this. Since Vladimir Putin's been president, he invaded during President Bush. He invaded during Barack Obama. He invaded during Joe Biden.
There's a lot of blame to go around. I agree.
Well, I'm just saying the only person he never invaded was during the presidency of Donald J. Trump, and that should be noted.
Erol, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Erol Morkoc there, Republican strategist and spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. 4:49, James Hansen.